Hi, this is Josh Apter from Manhattan Edit Workshop. Welcome to another edition of Sight, Sound, and Story Live Inside the Edit. Tonight we're going to be talking about Hello Tomorrow, an Apple TV Plus series. And I'll tell you that I had the good fortune of going to a DGA screening of one of the episodes a few months ago. I thought it was amazing kind of blend of like past and present and future all in one sort of look and feel, and the editing was terrific. And unfortunately, I didn't know at the time, but I was watching episode 6, and I thought for the screening they were showing us the pilot. So from a comprehension standpoint, very confusing, but I thought the show was actually really good and very much caught my attention. And I have gone back since and caught up to myself. So now I know exactly what's going on in the show. And I encourage you to do the same. Tonight, we're going to be joined by Bill Henry, ACE, Todd Downing, ACE, and Vanessa Procopio as our panelists, with moderator Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U, an old friend of ours. We're going to talk about the creative process that goes into this great show. And we really hope you enjoy tonight's event. We have to thank our sponsors, ACE, American Cinema Editors, AJA, Zeiss, and Filmmaker U. Of course, Jason Banke and Janet Dalton for working behind the scenes to make sure all of this goes smoothly. And at this point, I will get out of the way and I will let you get to tonight's program. Enjoy the show.
Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell for Sight, Sound, and Story, a speaker series that goes behind the scenes with industry leaders in post-production and cinematography. In this discussion, we'll be meeting with Todd Downing, Vanessa Procopio, and Bill Henry, the editing team behind Apple TV Plus's Hello Tomorrow, to discuss how they brought this Mad Men meets Jetsons world to our screens. Welcome to the show, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess my first question is, like, how did you guys break up the workload and determine who was going to cover which episodes?
And that was done for us.
Yeah.
We had no say.
Yeah.
It was one of the rare occasions where we did them sort of, and I use the word block loosely, in that we each did a set of sequential episodes. Todd did 1 and 8, 9, 10, right?
Correct.
And Vanessa did 2, 3, 4, and I did 5, 6, 7. And that was sort of a little bit unusual in that we weren't sort of doing the usual checkerboard situation. And I'm not really sure how that happened, but that was just sort of the role of it. And I didn't mind it so much, actually, because it was sort of nice being able to sort of follow through a portion of the series arc in one go. But normally they are checkerboarded. So
Yeah, it made it a little in a series like this where everything was brand new. I have to say, and the pilot, as all pilots do, got stretched out over a long period of time. So 2, 3, and 4 became kind of the first look at this new world. So we did. My assistant and I felt a very big responsibility to to help set some goals, or set some, pick out things that we like the best to see if they would stick, I guess you could say, and work with the producers and the directors about that.
And also really the sound as well, right?
Yeah, the sound.
I was going to say.
Yeah. So
we
got
because all the machines we had to make a new. They don't exist in the real world. So Vanessa kind of started with that of like, what do these floating cars sound like, and
what do the phones sound like? What does the baseball game sound like? That kind of thing.
Robots sound like, yeah.
And
what's interesting is, in one of the things I was watching and preparing for this, the actors were upset because I know that there was a lot of practical effects. Obviously, we didn't have floating cars, but there was one where they were sort of not complaining, but sort of joking that, like, they would be trying to do their lines, and in the background you'd hear these robots sort of whirring in the background, or you'd have someone pushing something in a green suit. Did that impact you or cause any problems for you guys while you were editing?
Scene where there was nothing, it was just a complete soundstage, you know what I mean? And I actually think the actors they warmed up quicker when they I don't know, I mean, if they're saying the opposite, then the opposite's probably true, but from what I saw, it seems like it kind of was like good that they had these robots to work against, rather than just an empty void that we're just going to plop stuff in later. But yeah, the vast majority of it was like this mix of practical and VFX, which I think gives it a nice feel. You know what I mean? It has an organic, dystopian feel to it.
I think the art department did a really good job of not letting it get in the way of the actors' movements or anything like that. The way that they handled the robots, the guys pushing the robot, it didn't interfere with their scenes, I don't think, in a way that was too distracting. I mean, it's distracting to see them on the screen, of course, when you're cutting, but it's we can get past that, I think, pretty easily.
Now, I would argue that one actor did get hit by a robot.
Oh.
I didn't hear about that. Who got hit by a robot?
Just the mum at the beginning, the first episode.
Yeah.
Crushed by a robot, yeah. Well, that was a van.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I guess because it's such a unique world. So, what were the discussions from the showrunner when you guys were just getting started to get you all on the same page and working with this footage? Like, what were they looking for when they came to you?
I think they weren't thinking, in discussions I had with them, they didn't seem to be thinking too much about it was a little bit about the futuristic stuff, but it was very grounded story stuff. Like, you know what I mean? They were referencing, for me, like they referenced Salesman by the Maisels. I think it's the Maisels, right? And, just sort of, it was more character, for me, it was like more character that they're interested in this, and keeping that incidental. It wasn't a lot of like, oh, look at this, kooky thing, in close up all the time, something kooky happened with the robot. It was more like, oh, this weird thing is happening in the background. And I think that was sort of our guiding light a little bit, I think.
What was it about the characters that they asked you?
I think it was, it's kind of his existential crisis, It was very kind of 50s, which is a very 50s thing also. It has the 50s aesthetic. I'm just realizing they kind of match. And just getting there was a lot of space in between lines and stuff. It wasn't like rush, 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 rush. It was kind of like seeing their face and trying to really be with them.
Yeah, well, in terms of the world that we were building, it was all meant to be to feel very natural, and that and it didn't always function properly. I mean, you can see that from the way it ended up on the air. I mean, in the final two, but the machines weren't working properly necessarily all the time. So it was tech, but it wasn't tech that had been perfected. So the robots were a little scratchy, and the machines operated on voice commands sometimes and didn't always work, and that sort of thing. And they interacted with the actors, to help accentuate their frustrations in certain situations, which was fun to do. So they were characters as well in some of the scenes. So that was kind of fun. But yeah, no, I mean, it's all about Billy Crudup's journey, as his fatherhood unfolded, and we were all very conscious of his relationship with his son, who didn't know he was a son, and trying to get all the subtleties of that from those two very good actors, and then have all the comedy play into it, which was really great fun with the other salesman.
Well, and Crudup was amazing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How about yourself, Bill?
Yeah, I mean, I think I didn't really have, other than the interview, I didn't have a straight up discussion about what their driving goal was, other than sort of following what was the blueprint in the script. But I mean, as we started working together after I put my first cut together, I mean, it just became very clear that it was Billy being sort of the centerpiece of this, as a man who was a dreamer, but in order to fulfill his dreams had to do a little bit of lying. And as it turns out, the show is basically about a world in which everybody is lying to some degree. and he had a very the episode, the middle episode that I worked on, episode 6, was started with a flashback, which I think was the only flashback in the series, showing sort of Billy at his last stand working for APP, and getting fired, and then making a suicide attempt, and that sort of was backstory there that sort of really drove home the drive of Billy's character, because then he started this Ponzi scheme to both get himself out of his situation and also try and figure out if he could actually achieve, something on his own, like his father in the past did, developing this whole, his father was very involved in the beginning of the technology that was sending people to the moon, and his relationship with Billy's relationship with his father was also very muddled and problematic, and I think his effort to sort of reconnect with Joey was sort of the mainstay of the series, and him trying to come clean in his own way about his relationship with his own son. So when working with the showrunners, it was really, when we were cutting it, it was really just about trying to find Billy's constant conflict within himself about the lies that he was saying that he felt were positioning, getting the dream moving forward, and then being conflicted about the fact that some of these lies were really going to hurt a lot of people, particularly the client base that they were selling these pieces of paper, which weren't really residences on them.
There's the added thing that he, not without Joey knowing that, he was his son, he was teaching him how to lie. That right. that was from the very beginning. That was one of the important scenes in episode 2 was, we used to call it the cookie scene. Smell the cookies. He's teaching him how to talk to people about the timeshare, or the units that they were selling, and how to approach them, and you have to walk in and be able to smell the cookies, and that became sort of a running joke between them as the season went on. So it was a delicate balance, trying to balance the fact that he was trying to shepherd him along, but he was basically teaching him how to lie.
Well, and Joey, in his own way, which was very funny in that one, where he actually does get in the door, and then you later find out, to do a sale, that he actually paid the guy $10 to pretend, just let me in, I'll give you $10, so that he could come out and tell Jack that he had done it. Yeah.
Yeah, he's in the red before he ever gets in the black.
That's right.
Well, and it's interesting because you've all sort of touched on this, but this idea that they're teaching Joey to essentially, for lack of a better term, be a bad person or to lie. And that's one of the things I found really interesting with the show, is that essentially, at least for the first couple of episodes, like there's sort of this, we start to see Billy Crudup's character as a bad person, like he's taking these people's money, he's got a Ponzi scheme. So I'm wondering, because it's not really until we see that flashback of before and why he's sort of in this position, but I'm wondering, like, how do you deal with that when one of the key things is that you're trying to keep people hooked on your show, and you don't want them to like change the channel or change the show, but we have these characters that aren't necessarily going to be likable for the first little bit, or might not have characteristics that people find likable. Is there a different way you approach the story, or how did you guys work with that footage to make sure that people were still hooked?
Well, they love each other. They may not, they may be doing bad things, but they definitely loved each other. And Jack loved all those guys who were working with them, and he showed it to them. So I think those relationships can hold your interest, even though there might be an overarching sense of evil or whatever trickery going on.
Having a great lead actor helps with that a lot. You know, like someone, and like I did that in another show that like Mrs. America, where Kate Blanchett was playing Phyllis Schlafly, who's like super evil 70s woman, and like you stuck with it just because, you know, their performance that you in, you know what I mean? So
we can take some credit for it to a degree, but it is really them being just very good. I mean, Billy's a very remarkable actor. I mean, Hanifa, who plays Shirley, is also sort of, you know, she is a great way. You can read what's going on behind the eyes at every point. And it was really just sort of about digging all of that out, so that they all had their vulnerabilities. They all had things that made them put them in a position of well, like I said, vulnerability. And I never, it was all that they just felt they were likable. I felt, despite the fact that they were doing all of these horrible things. And we were just constantly trying to steer us in that direction and gleaning those beats out that made them more human along the way.
As we slowly learn, you start to see that Billy Crudup's character essentially wants to do good. Like, he wants to somehow flip it so that they do build the place, or they do figure out how to pull
that's
it
key
off.
too, was they didn't think they were doing, you know, being evil. Most of them.
Exactly.
Right, that too.
But, like, you really believe that was kind of the tension of, like, you know, this aspirational living that, you know, we're all sold all the time, and actually peeling that back a little bit, you realize, oh, what does that mean? Like, Jack.
I was just gonna say, he's always talking. I mean, in that center episode I was talking about, Jack's always, you know, pontificating. His dad also said, you know, Jack's dad is always saying no one's not a dreamer. And I think that that's sort of the interesting part of the show, is that I think you can relate to people's optimism about trying to putting themselves in a position where they are trying to get a job, or they're trying to get a company off the ground. It's always, you have to be a little bit, put yourself in a tough position and make yourself believe that you can make these things happen. So it does take a little bit of, I guess, just optimism. Is it optimism, not necessarily lying to oneself? And I think that's what Jack's big sort of conflict within himself is. Him telling himself he's not a liar, he's a dreamer.
Yeah.
And trying to convince everyone around him that he is that and they are that.
Yeah. I want to jump to our first video, which, Vanessa, is yours. I'm wondering if you could set this up for us.
Well, Jack, in his efforts to gain Joey's favor, offers to take him to a baseball game. And I thought it would be a fun one to look at for that, and also for the fact that the writers created a new kind of sport, basically. I mean, it's baseball, but it's jet ball, so it had a lot of robots in it and special things that were supposed to be going on the field. So and things that were going on in the stands, what they were selling and that sort of thing, was all a brand new world. So we had a lot of fun working with the footage on this one.
Hey, that's all right. God, Cheryl, that's how you spent it? On you. Oh, look at this crowd. Imagine if we sold all of them.
What do you say, Jack? Making our own turn.
You're way out of your depth. Cheryl, how are we supposed to handle this type of volume? You got no clue how this is going to play out.
So what was the footage like that you got for this? Like, were there several takes of that you could work with? Were there different angles? What'd you have?
Yeah, both. There were several takes and there were different angles of Billy, certainly. Billy in singles and two shots, and with the four of them, I believe, is what we had for that scene. But that's the tie that he had loaned to his son to wear for his first day at work, and he gave it back. So, it held all that emotional significance. And Joey had already left because he was embarrassed by the fact that he hadn't been able to succeed that day. So, yeah, he had all that emotion running through his head. Jack did, and then to have the stunt that Shirley pulls by getting them to play that video, there was a lot going on. And again, his face, I think, tells it all.
What was the reason behind? Because you essentially choose that one angle of him with them slightly soft in the background for anything with him. So what was the choice of sitting with that shot over a different angle or anything?
Oh yeah, because it's all about him. I mean, pretty straightforward. When someone gives you a performance like that and is letting everything read on his face, there was kind of no question that that's the way to play it. He's, Shirley has to lean in, but that's all you really need from anybody else at that point.
And there's an interesting sort of thing, or I guess way you guys are approaching the series, and that is controlling the information we as the audience know, and sort of like determining when to lay it out, and using facial expressions to sort of help reveal certain elements. So like, how did you determine, where to reveal certain pieces of information, or what to reveal? Like obviously it's going to be in the script, but in some cases you had to work with just visuals, sort of like in this scene.
I don't know how to explain that exactly. You kind of feel your way through it. I mean, there were a lot of things that there are certain story points that have to be part of the sequence of shots. Yet we couldn't forget what was going on in the game. We had to see the billboard. A certain amount of information had to play on the billboard, but it's all about performance to begin with. So in a sequence like that, what I do when I look for, like when I'm reviewing the dailies for a scene like that, my process is that I pick out the best performances first, and then I try and determine how I can use those the best. I mean, there are trade-offs that you have to make very often because it doesn't fit with the way the conversation is proceeding, or somebody else's performance doesn't fit in with that one. But if there's a really incredible performance, I try and work around it, and then the other shots take their length, based on how much we can manage to incorporate of that and still keep that performance as the central.
Backwards from that. I mean, if that amazing part is in the middle, you can almost like edit it.
Yeah. If it's good enough, and then you get to the point where like, if the other person, if the continuity doesn't work, or somebody in the background, in that scene, when there's 4 people in a shot like that, you can almost never get everybody from shot to shot to be doing the right thing or then, I remember this scene actually in particular. I don't know if it was reflected in that particular clip, but Hank is reading his scores, and the other guy is eating his nacho thing, and Joey's already left, but and then Hanifa was doing something different. So everybody had their own little shticks that they were doing in addition to, so you can never get all that. But one of the very first editors I worked for, I remember and I got a name drop, was Ann Coates. I was the second assistant to Ann Coates on a feature I'm not even going to tell you what year it was, but I remember asking her, and she was like, I said, what's the most important thing? And she said, performance, performance, performance. And I still hear that in my head.
Well, continuity is for cowards.
You just have to sacrifice it sometimes.
Yeah.
So we'll just make up T-shirts that say that.
I think that's a Thelma quote, actually. I may be stealing.
Yeah, and she's the queen of not having continuity.
That's right. But that can be great fun. I mean, for so long, I was so concerned with it when I was first starting out. And now it's sort of a game to see what you can get away with.
Yeah.
And who's going to notice it first and who's going to care the most?
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes it can get pretty far down the line before someone isn't he holding a bottle in the shot before? Can you?
I got called out on Twitter on this show about continuity that I thought didn't matter, by the way.
Did you really?
I was like, oh yeah, he puts his hand in his pocket twice. I'm like,
oh boy.
Yeah.
Is there something that ended up for all of you? Is there something that ended up on the cutting room floor that you really liked but just didn't work for the story or worked for the series?
There was a very funny scene that got cut actually between Hank and I'm sorry, I can't spacing on the other character's name. Hank Azaria and his, the guy he shared the room with. That got cut out. That was very funny between them, but it was kind of took a left turn in the sequence, and it could only play at a certain place, or maybe there were a couple of choices, but it had to play early in an episode, and it was just too much of a divergence in terms of the content. But they were really funny together.
I had many scenes cut, but there was just some improv from Hank Azaria. Like after the scene was over, that he would just start doing, really funny stuff. And you're like, you love it, but you're kind of like,
it tracks the scene out. Yeah.
I've heard that from so many editors where they're like, they'll yell cut and the actor will keep going. And they're like, that's the best stuff, but it has nothing to do with the story.
Sometimes that becomes the story though, too. Yeah. It works the other way around. You're like, just check every scene before and after the slates and see if there's anything good we can use for whatever.
Yeah, they can turn into Band-Aids sometimes.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And there were no Band-Aids in this series, right?
I don't know. I may have stolen one thing from after cut or before roll. I don't remember now.
Okay. Now I want to jump to Todd's choice, which is Blast Zone. Do you want to set this one up for us?
Yeah, this kind of touches on what I was saying earlier. This is actually why I chose the clip, because it was a scene that was just on a soundstage, and there was just literally like nothing there. Maybe two prop street lamps or floodlights. So they were really acting against nothing. It was just them and like a wind machine blowing on them. And it's when the rocket comes down that's supposed to take everybody to their non-existent condo, and the sheriff is a former TV star, kind of has lost his mind, so he's a bit delusional too. So you're not sure if he even, he kind of believes that this spaceship is real with aliens coming and stuff like that too.
Sheriff, can you hear me? No, stay back! I'm about to unload a cork star!
No, Sheriff, I am on your side!
Yes!
Sheriff, you blasted the Gargon fleet! You did it! The gas attack, it screwed your memory. I was protected by my trinium suit thanks to you, but we have got to get out of the blast zone now, Sheriff!
I don't trust rogue agents!
Never thought I'd get so close to see one like this.
On TV, but yeah, this is much better.
Sheriff, you saved us!
Maybe I don't know a damn thing anymore.
All you need to know is that you're a hero! Pride of the galaxy!
Can't argue with justice.
Hats off, Todd. I remember seeing that with none of that in there. None of the effects.
And there was a grip, and I would laugh so hard because there was an ultra wide, and there was like, I don't know what people on set are called. But like he was like throwing leaves with this fan. So there was and that was like the only practical thing, and it was just so hilarious. once. And I think they kind of struck that after the first or second take. They're like, this is pointless. But yeah, it was just a sound stage with nothing behind them. So it was kind of an interesting scene to cut because we sort of built the world of sound of like the rocket and the wind blasts and, you know, whatever other stuff was going on. It was kind of interesting to do, instead of reacting to what's on the screen to build the sound around it, we did the opposite. We built like a soundscape that then the VFX matched. So it was yeah, and also just the actors reacting against nothing, like, you know what I mean? Like the older couple looking at that woman I love too. She's so funny. I don't know her name. Looking at the rocket land, you know, they're just looking up at a light, you know. Yeah. So it was kind of interesting to see, you know, to try and pull out, you know.
Well, and what I was going to ask is, so like when I've talked to people before about working with stuff that's like 100% green screen, or one of the things that can be tricky is getting your timing right when you don't necessarily have a monster standing there. So is that way you utilize the sound force to sort of like build a sense of timing for yourself?
Yeah, I think so, because you don't know, like we didn't know what the rocket was going to look like at that when we were cutting it. Like it hadn't been, there was still different designs going and how it was going to land and stuff. So you don't know actually how long you want to look at the rocket. You know what I mean? Is it going to be interesting enough? So it was a lot of just like, okay, hope this works a little bit. And I think it did. I think they did a fun, you know, the VFX people were fantastic. But yeah, a lot of it was just closing your eyes and pretending like, okay, this is what
Did you make any trims, Todd? Did you do anything to the VFX when they came in terms of length? I'm always curious about that because it is so hard to find that.
Yeah, I was wondering if we should, but you know, it was also so far you know, the past few years, VFX houses are just bombarded because everyone's just like gotten lazy on set and they're like, oh, we'll just paint that out and do this. So they have so much work.
True.
Amount of booms and shots the past.
Everything.
Tons of booms now. Nobody cares anymore.
Anyway, the VFX houses are very overloaded. You know what I mean? So it was like 4 months after we locked. So I don't know if we could have adjusted anyways. I mean,
we had no idea. Well, the rockets, I didn't have any rockets in the early episodes, but I was like dying to see what the rockets were going to look like. You know, we were just waiting.
There was some temp stuff that my AE would pull, you know what I mean? So we could get a sense, like just crudely, you know, comping in. So we could get a little bit of timing. But yeah, it was just a, you know, faith that it was going to work.
Yeah, we had rockets, you know, it was supposed to be in the earlier episodes. There are some scenes when there are rockets off in the distance, you know, as if they're going back and forth to the moon all the time. And it was really fun just to, you know, in a very childish way, to have some images of things like that.
Yeah.
You know,
I was reading something recently, like in Star Wars, and George, the first cut of that, he would intercut, like, you know, because everything was much longer than before he had all the spaceships and stuff. He would intercut like World War II footage to get the pacing of like battles. I always thought that was so interesting.
That's fun. Yeah.
Well, now we use YouTube.
Yeah. Some Ukrainian
footage. So one of the things I found, so again, similar to Vanessa's, when I was sent sort of like a time slot, and what I found interesting is that one starts, it's almost bookended with Myrtle and the other guy in the car watching on both ends.
Yeah.
And what I'm interested in is building tension and releasing tension in the scene, right? Because we have this essentially a countdown, you know, this guy's going to be landed on. So how did you approach the scene to help sort of ramp up the tension?
That scene, we took forever in that, because that was the scene of them on the platform. I'm not sure if it was scripted to be intercut, but it became very intercut. You know what I mean? Going back and forth between checking in with the different characters of them watching and seeing what's happening. So I think that helped with the tension a lot, is not just being stuck in one place, you know. And also, I don't think you need stuck in VFX land for that long either. You know what I mean? You want to kind of go to some real meat also. So yeah, and actually, and the ship landing on the platform, that was actually, I think the scene was about twice as long, that foot, you know what I mean? And we kind of realized, like, you don't really need them chatting a ton when a rocket's about to land on them, you know what I mean? So I think that helped with the tension a lot too.
I'd love to jump to Bill, your clip here, which is the music can't stop. Do you want to set this one up for us?
Well, again, this is from that episode that I mentioned earlier that began with Jack being fired by APP and then his botched suicide attempt. And right before he attempts suicide, after he gets fired, he calls Hanifa Shirley, who is at that time just a service operator for APP. And they've clearly developed some sort of relationship, and she's a fan of his. And so this scene then is, you're now in the present that I chose. And I just thought I just really liked the two of them in the scene. And it, even though it had is not all like the characters in Heat, but it just did have a little bit of that sort of calculating sort of deal making that I dug between the two of them, and her sort of joining ranks with him with an idea he hadn't ever thought of.
The music can't stop, Cheryl.
Which means what?
These things, they're worth something. Now, we stop selling, everybody panics, and it all falls apart. We keep smiling, keep selling. We can make enough money to make things right.
You mean pay people back?
Sure.
And who pays the new customers back?
Well, we'll find newer customers.
That's not a solution, Jack.
But it'll buy us enough time to find one. We sold big at that club, and none of them want to launch anytime soon.
One day they might.
What if Jenkins had big plans and maybe broke ground even? What if he just never finished what he started?
More likely he just robbed everyone. Here.
143?
We sell 143 units. We got all the refunds we need, and this whole thing's over.
Now, what's interesting is I originally was thinking Pulp Fiction, where they're sitting at the diner.
That's probably better.
Yeah. What was the reason? Because I noticed that we basically stay in the over the shoulder shots until she takes out that paper and puts it down. I was wondering what was the reason?
Well, because that was only about half the scene. But from the moment she suggests 143 units, she then just follows up by suggesting that this very wealthy widow that they had met in the prior episode is a possible mark for them to use to have her buy a whole bunch of these condos as an investment, and then they would be able to pay back all of the people who want their refunds, and then also turn a profit in the scheme. And the very idea that she is sort of on board and starting to use Jack's playbook to think up new ways of getting them out of trouble and possibly into more trouble, I found very amusing.
Now, was that scene larger? Because you said it was only part of the scene.
Yeah. It goes on longer. Well, only in that what we saw just now was longer, and that was where she makes the suggestion about the wealthy widow coming in, and and there were line lifts and stuff within it that we did pull to sort of tighten it up. But to answer your question in terms of generally. I just was playing it loose until she makes the suggestion, and then he sort of takes interest, and then I moved in closer with tighter coverage. But that's not all, and sometimes I think I bounced a little bit because there was, when he recognizes that she's, taking from his playbook, he sort of sits back and he's like, very sort of self-satisfied, and also thinks that it's a great idea. And I remember his body language and everything he did in that was much more interesting in that than it was in the close-up. so that was, a moment later that I just, as Vanessa was talking about, sometimes those are the things that you sort of make your shift your scene around. And I remember sort of really standing up for that with producers who wanted something else at one point. I don't recall, but I do remember fighting for it because I thought it was a really nice beat. But yeah, I do what Vanessa does. I go through, I watch the scene. I use locators heavily, so I'll watch down each of the cameras. That one, I think they did shoot in 2 cameras, so I'll watch each camera individually and make my marks, location marks for both line reads that I like and also reactions that I like, and then I go back and construct it.
I guess for all of you, is there a particular scene or moment that was difficult to execute that you're really proud of the outcome?
I don't know about so difficult to execute. They were such good actors, but the that cookie scene in the car, like thinking like,
What was it? Was it about the delivery, like finding the right sort of
the delivery and the timing and the looks back and forth? I mean, it's so super simple. It's like 2 guys in a car, but sometimes those can be like the most, I don't know, challenging in a storytelling way.
What's interesting about yours is we're aware of the fact that Joey's his son, so there's this sort of duality that you have to play out, that he's trying to get Joey to be successful because it's sort of his he's trying to fix what he messed up when he was younger, essentially. So there's that interesting sort of duality that you have to work with. Was that something that you had to find the balance for in there?
Yeah, totally. That's what I mean. It was like, what we were, I think we've talked about this among ourselves too. It was like, who knows what, when to. So that was the very beginning of sharing information. And, Jack is trying so hard not to let him know that he's actually his father, but he also is looking for what of his son might be there, what potential he might have. He's like, you're my son, you ought to be able to know how to do this kind of thing. So it was a really interesting dynamic, I think. And Joey the actor was really good. I thought, so it was really fun to have this like very experienced and very young 2 actors playing this scene together and working off of each other's emotions.
Yeah, that Joey kid, he was like straight out of Juilliard. I think this is
exactly.
pretty impressive that he went up toe to toe with someone like Billy and managed to hold his own.
Wow, that's very impressive.
Numbering, what was the question? The question was, particularly difficult. Yeah, it was, like Vanessa just said, it was just 2 people talking. So it's kind of sometimes, I mean, that's kind of like my favorite thing to cut, because it feels like such an accomplishment to be like, serious, because it's like, you know what I mean? You don't have all these bells and whistles to be like, oh, look at that cool thing. It's just like, it's really about the performance and the writing and stuff and really honing that. And so the opening scene, it went through, I mean, months of different versions of like, how fast is it? Should we try and make it like quick and take out all the air and so it's kind of funny, or should we make it kind of weird and depressing and awkward moments and stuff? And it's still a pretty long, I mean, that's what I love about it. It's a pretty long, bold scene to start a series, like a sci-fi series with, especially. So I think it's just under 5 minutes of them talking at the bar. But I think it's, it was very difficult to get, but it's also one of my favorite, because I love it when stuff like that works.
Yeah, I agree. I had a couple of those too. I think these guys sort of, they had a tendency to do these very long, like the scene in episode 106 when Jack gets fired was a very long scene that really I spent a long time sort of tailoring that one. And then there was another one where he is at the top of episode 7, where he's trying to make the sales pitch to the wealthy widow, played by Doug Mara, and that one was that was also like a 5-minute scene in a enclosed, in a hover limousine. So they were just tricky, and there was a lot of dialogue, and it's sort of about seeing what we could pull out and still have it make sense, and those were probably the biggest challenges in terms of putting the show together. But I mean, their writing spoke for itself, and I think that things held together in a way that we weren't doing a lot of triage in terms of storytelling. Occasionally, there'd be an ADR line that was asked for by the studio or the producer to clarify, but other than that, it was just mostly about trying to hone things down. So we were playing in the 32-minute zone.
I was going to mention in episode 4, there's a long sequence that jumps back and forth, that intercuts between Billy and his son, and Billy and Joey and his girlfriend and the father of the girlfriend. Joey's trying to work them and be a dad at the same, and pretend to be a dad, and that's intercut with Eddie at the bar betting on who's bet on a jetball game, and the jetball game is on the TV at the same time, and the guy comes in to collect his debt. So I mean, sometimes when there are, as much fun as the two character scenes are in the car, it can be difficult to get all those scenes intercut in a row and have it lead up to a big climax when then Herb throws up and his wife arrives and Myrtle's in the booth and everything happens at once. So that was fun and long and challenging.
I have one last question for you guys. What is, outside of editing, what is something that you loved about this series?
I loved the sort of politics of it in a way. You know what I mean? The sort of like I said, everything is always supposed to be aspirational in TV now and stuff like that. And it kind of really went for that, but then also showed what that means underneath it. You know what I mean? Of like, you lie and to get what you. I thought it was a really kind of sharp indictment of the United States. But like, I really thought the politics were really right on.
I'd have to say, for me, it was super fun just to be working on something about living on the moon. I mean, maybe because I grew up watching, I actually saw those first televised moon trips to the moon when they were happening. And then I worked on a documentary once about the first trip to the Apollo 11 mission to the moon. And so it was something that I always, was always a dreamer's kind of view of the moon that I had. So I'm glad it was the moon and not, some timeshares in Hawaii they were selling. It was made it a whole thing that it was like
how about yourself,
something that unbelievable and aspirational.
I don't know. I think I have to say I was most driven by these characters and their ability to sort of follow Jack's mantra, and that it's not lying, it's making things possible. And I think that going to the moon and anything in life that feels completely out of the realm of possibility, that people are striving for, and watching them try and make those things happen. I just found it, very interesting in a way. I mean, I remember when I met with them for the interview, I said it's there, and also a little bit of the tragedy of it. I mean, I said that it sort of had beats of, or reminded me a bit of Death of a Salesman in a way. And I thought that sort of seeing that sort of, again, it was, I guess it was the 40s that took place post-war, but same sort of tragic American dream story that this told in a very new environment that was fun to live in for 6 months.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you guys.
It was a pleasure, Gordon. Thank you for talking to us.
Yes, thank you, Gordon.
And I want to thank everyone for joining me this week. Make sure to check out Hello Tomorrow on Apple Plus or Apple TV Plus. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching.
I hope you enjoyed tonight's event. Again, I want to thank AJA, ACE, Zeiss, and Filmmaker U for helping us put these events up. We have another one coming up July 20th, which is Bono and the Edges of Sort of Homecoming with David Letterman. That's a documentary. We're going to talk about the sound design of that film. And again, Jason Banky and Janet Dalton, thank you so much for doing all the behind the scenes work. So all I have to do is sit here and look sort of pretty. Well, that's a relative term for sure. We're coming back with a live event really soon. We will have concrete details on that. So keep watching, and we can't wait to meet you in person and raise a glass for our first in-person Sight, Sound, and Story event in a really long time. This is Josh Apter from Manhattan Edit Workshop, signing off. Thanks a lot.